listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And we have we're going to continue on in our Lenten podcast series over the social principles, and we have a wonderful special guest with us today, Pastor Tyler Amundson. He's the pastor at Shiloh UMC in Billings, Montana. So love having a hometown guy here with me on the podcast. And you can also check him out at #ZestyReverend. So I encourage you to do that for sure. But Tyler, thanks, man, for coming on and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do and where you're at, and then we'll dive into the social principles.
Sure. So I'm a pastor in Billings, Montana, it's the biggest city in Montana, which isn't saying much. I just want to say that up front. So, but,
it's bigger than my town, right?
It's bigger where you're at, friend. So I'm on the west end of the city. So we're kind of a little bit of a suburban church that was planted in the middle of a wheat field. And now we're trying to figure out what that means as the town grows up around us. So, and for me personally, ministry is all about being out in the community, connecting with people where they're at, looking at where the community's at and where we see Christ in the community and where we see that we're called to share that love. So I'll share more later in our conversation, but I love to figure out demographics of an area and see where, God's like, hey, you should probably pay attention to this population of folks because nobody's doing ministry with them. So,
right. Yeah, love that. Well, we're doing social principles or going through some of the social principles and bringing awareness to what we believe as United Methodist and how we connect people, all people, to their humanity and to God and bring dignity through that. And I know there's a couple of things that you're doing in particular that revolve around these principles. And so if you will, unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. Well, so the big one for me has been this social principle around age and just the reality that if we're going to really be the body of Christ, we got to be a multi-generational church in a way that we haven't really realized at any point in our history, really. And so in particular, one area we've been looking at has been Shiloh. I've been joking with our congregation. We have young people to the south and west of us, and we have old people to the north and east of us. And it really pushed our congregation to say, okay, you want to reach both those populations because it's not just about getting all the young people in your church,
Yep.
right? Like
Right.
There are people hurting that are older and isolated, and they need as much resources as the young people that you just want because it's nice to have kids in church. So
Right. Yeah.
So we started some work with that, and I think that's probably where I want to go first. Is just we've been reaching out to aging care facilities in the area, and they're bringing into our church building information for folks how to age well. Like it's been pretty incredible to watch. These care facilities are trying to find these venues to share all this information they're learning as they do their work. And they just want to find a way to do that well and get it into a space where they have an audience. And I was like, well, we've got this captive audience every couple of weeks, or every other, we can bring you in. So that's been powerful. I mean, we did so just from that demographic of how do we serve those who are older, we've had a couple programs on dementia, and literally had an experience where I got to experience what it was like to have dementia. They put things in your shoes and you put headphones on your head. So it's overwhelming sensory input, and put glasses on so you can't see straight. And I was in tears when I got done with it. It was this experience. It was 4 minutes. I had the symptoms of what dementia would be like, is what it's like. And I was in tears at the end, imagining what people in my congregation are going through. So,
right.
So just pretty powerful stuff on that end of the spectrum there. So,
yeah.
So in our social principles, we the whole idea is to drive to action. And so how were you able to kind of persuade your congregation to look broader? I mean, that's a great task within its own right. Totally. we all serve all three of us probably serve congregations that the first thing that they say is we want young families, we want young people,
Right.
because that's what it means to be the church. And I know probably both of us probably were shaking our heads, thinking, no, that's not what it means to be the church. And so how did you get your church to kind of broaden their horizons a little bit? Like, did you just sit down with them as social principles one day and be like, here's what it says about aging?
Unfortunately not. I mean, the social principles are great. Like, you can give one little thing out of it and say, like, we're supposed to be, as Methodists, serving all ages. No, but I stumbled across this fact, like, and actually there's no good reference to this fact, so I don't even know if it came from a real report, but it basically said ages 0 to 65 is now young people. Like, let's just stop. Like, people are living to 100 years old. So 65 and under, you're young. And I watch my congregation, this 30-year-old's up there. They're all 30 years older than me. And they look at me and they're like, yeah, we're young. We could do that. Like, and then I said, 65, I think the range was 65 to 80 is like, or excuse me, 65 to 80 is middle age, 80, 90, older, 90 and above, old age. Like, it changed the demographic kind of thing.
Right.
And I said, if we're called to serve every generation, and 80 plus is the fastest growing demographic in the nation of people, I mean, it's growing itself. Like, it's not necessarily growing, but it's growing itself. There's more people are living longer. Then what are we thinking? Not going out and sharing God's love with folks. Like, these people. You walk into the care facilities and you see them sitting in their rooms or not finding ways to engage or looking for community. And so it intrigued them, like, oh yeah, so we know how to reach those people.
Right.
They're our friends, like, they're our neighbors. We're scared to death to reach young people because we don't know what they want.
Right.
And so that's been giving them a sense of old isn't a bad thing. Like, aging isn't a bad thing. Aging well. That's literally the title we've given our program, is Aging Well. Like, how do you grow into that? So that shifted the conversation for the congregation. They started to be like, oh yeah, okay, we got friends we can invite to church. We got a way to do that. So anyway, does that answer your question, Matt? I think that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's just one of those things that, like, it's amazing to see, within the social principles, how many of our churches don't have, like, never even, like, I didn't know these existed. And, like, here you all are doing something that's, like, to me, I think it's one of the key elements as we continue to, I mean, we're going to have a lot of old people that we're going to need to minister to that have either, and the boomer generation, and I'm, not to pick on them because I'm not, but, like, oh my gosh, talk about a great opportunity for mission and ministry. And a lot of them don't. I mean, we get all upset about millennials not having church home. It's those boomers that left first, and they just took their children with them. And I was reading, I think it's Hayden Shaw's book on it was one of those generational. I think it's generational IQ, and he talked about, if you want to grow the church, go get the grandparents, because you can get the grandparents in, you'll get the kids, and then you'll eventually get the family. And I've really wrestled with that, especially in my current appointment, looking at what are some ways that we can provide, things for like that and reaching out. And I think that that's just vital to having those conversations and thinking about, this is part of who we are as a church, is to look at all people, but then also just, like, do it. I mean, how often do we just talk about this stuff and just equipping people and going and doing it?
So I'm in the sales process of this right now too. Like, I can't say it's like booming yet, right? Like, yeah. I do know we did this in the town I served previously, and they're having 40 people a week show up for this is those kind of programs. So I know it's doable. But part of it was, doing enough of those experiments and letting folks know. So I'm in the sales process of it. Right. And then now folks are coming, and their leaders in the church are saying, like, this isn't a bad idea, right? Like, this makes sense to us because we can figure out how to reach these folks. But I had to give them the data and the sense of empowerment first before we could ever get to that space. So, and then it's regular communities, almost like worship, right? Like, next step for me is regular times each week that we have something in our church for this generation, so people can just start showing up. Like, they don't have to know exactly what the program is or anything.
Right. I think something that's really important that you said that we don't do well is the demographic research, right? Every church is like, hey, we want young people. And when I go to Brady, Montana, that's a town of less than 200 people, and none of them are young. It's like, where do you want them to come from, right?
Right.
And they're one of the exceptions I've served. They just, well, let's just go get people, right? They haven't said the young people thing. But when you reframe that demographic of 0 to 65 as young people, that changes the game, right? That changes the whole way you approach grabbing people, how you do ministry in the church, because, well, it's everybody. It's everybody at this point.
And back to Matt's comment, like, that's the boomers now, right?
Right.
Like, they're 65 to 70, they're starting to retire. Like,
yeah.
So they're telling them, you're not old. You actually have a significant portion of your life left to serve God and be engaged in the church. Like, that changes their head, because they're thinking, I'm retiring. I don't know what I have left to give.
Right.
And that's what I'm struck by in this work. I mean, that's where the social principle comes through, is a lot of these folks are seeing themselves as worthless. Like,
right.
They literally feel like they've done their job for society and they don't know what's next. And, and they're not. I mean, they've got compassion, they've got wisdom, they've got things that they just need to share.
And now they have a ton of time, right?
Except they're snowbirds too, so they feel bad when they're not here. So you've got to find new ways for them to be in the church too. Like,
right, exactly. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because I hear that a lot, where all the places I've served, when people retire, oh, I've lost my voice, right? Nobody cares about me anymore because I'm not working, or I'm not in this. And one of my mentors, he retired, pastoral mentor, he retired, and he said the church quit caring about me. Since I wasn't in the pulpit anymore, nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. Nobody wanted to hear my opinion. I was forgotten about. And the only connection that I have with the church now is my retirement check, right? Yep. And he said, I wasn't aware of this until I retired. And he said, I'm not the only one. It's not just pastors that feel this way. It's all people who retire. We go, well, what now? Nobody cares, right? And so it's finding a way to have that voice back, or to give a voice, or remind them that, oh, no, you're not done. You're not done.
Well, and that's something that we started here. Well, the previous pastor started this, and I'm strongly encouraging it, is that we have a Tuesday group of men that show up and they do some little odds and end jobs around the church. And so, I mean, it's one of those ones where, like, man, I would love to have a crew follow them around, because you never know what kind of comedy may come out of them. I mean, I've watched him. And it's just been a good group of men to get to know. And so, like, having those opportunities, I like the whole idea of that the church is a place that can be a place for people to have a space that may not necessarily, like, feel like, hey, I was in the teaching field for 20 years and now I don't know what to do, and saying, hey, we have opportunities for you to serve in some different ways. And I think that, when the church can do that, man, it's crazy to see how great it can be.
Well, and I'm struck. So the congregation I'm in too, they literally, when I first got here, there was no kids coming out for children's time a couple times. And luckily I brought 2 kids with me, which helped the whole demographic. It's so fascinating to watch the shame on their faces. Like, they didn't feel like they were being church anymore. And I was like, whoa. When did we get this sense that when you don't have this certain thing that everyone says you should have as church, you're no longer a church, right? Like, 2 or more gathered in my name, your church. Like, let's go, people. Right. It's been a big thing. One of the other things I want to share with this too has been, our communities don't know that we have these social principles, or these needs to, like, we're called to engage this. So within the first 2 months of me being at this church talking about this stuff, I got one of the facilities to invite, so there's coalitions for aging in communities. And this group of 30 people I had in our fellowship hall, and I basically got to share what we were trying to do as a church and say, you guys have the resources, give me a call. Like, I'm not going to be building programs. I want you to come in and share what you know. We'll provide the space in the community. You get in here and do that. And I shared with that group this story about my previous church. This woman came to our new member class and was sitting there, and she got to the end and she said, well, I've really appreciated being here, but you really don't care that I'm at your church. I mean, this was exactly what she said to me and the senior pastor. And we asked her what she meant. And she said, I'm an old lady. You don't need any more of those. So you're not really excited that I'm here. And if we can overcome that in our churches, and those old ladies are the ones who've been thriving our churches for years. I mean,
right.
If we can convince them they have worth, then let the Christ be unleashed from the church. They're going to go everywhere. So, yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what. So I started, and I started doing this at my last appointment, and I brought it with me at this appointment, is doing intergenerational mission trips. And I have found those to be very powerful. And one of my favorites was, actually it was in my first appointment. We had a lady that was 83 years old that went with us, and she was in it more than almost the young people were. I was like, man, I would kill to have your energy at your age. And I think that the more we can provide space for, those, 7 to 8 generations to interact, it's amazing to see. And I really do believe it does start in worship. And I have a hard time when I hear of churches that like, no, we're gonna invite our children forward, and then we're gonna send them and hide them so that way they don't make noise. And I have a hard time with that. And I'm like, we had a family when they first visited, they came and they had been at a couple churches in town where they hide the kids. And so like, so what do we do with our children? And I'm like, you bring them into worship. And they're like, really? Like, yep, I want them into worship. And I think that's one of those things when we can make those invitations, whether they're young or old. And say, hey, yeah, you have a place here, and we want to value as a human, and so come and be a human, and I think that's key, and I think that the great thing is in the Methodist Church, we kind of have that built in through the social principles. It's like
exactly
we should be doing this. I mean, I know it's not church law, but man, it's one of those nice suggestions that you really should be doing,
right.
And so that's kind of where I feel about that. And Tyler, I know I know we're inching closer to you having to go to your next thing like a good old pastor should. But, is there anything else like in regards to not just the social principles, but just what you discovered in doing this that, we'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I know we've got some short time, but I actually would love to jump into something else I found with the social principles about mental health ministry. If you guys have some time.
Yeah, please. Please.
Yeah.
So there's a cool study out there called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It comes out of Kaiser Permanente, and the CDC did the study of folks over a 20-year period and found 10 ACEs, they call them. And the congregations look at you funny when you first share it with it, like, what cards are you putting on the table here? But it's 10 these adverse childhood experiences. They've identified 10, and they're things like parents being incarcerated, a parent using drugs, separation from parents, so going into foster care, things like that. Divorce in the family is actually one that has a pretty high marker for folks too. But these 10 ACEs, kids with 4 or more have, of course, higher levels of mental illness, but higher chronic diseases when they get older, and early death is more likely with folks that have 4 or more ACEs. And so I share this with you because there's this great part in our social principles about just mental health in general, but about caring for the whole community too. And I've actually been quoting this ACEs study as the secular gospel, because it literally names why Jesus told us to be compassionate. Like, we have to reduce the number of ACEs in our communities. That's why the church exists, is to find ways to do that. So anyway, you guys could research that more, that kind of thing. But the big thing from it is data is now supporting why Christ called us to compassion. Like, and I'm struck by, like, we're starting to see things that we intuitively knew when as Christians moving ahead come to fruition in science too. And so, hey, heads up, like, we're doing the right thing. We just got to keep figuring out how to do it well.
Yeah. Oh man. So I'm glad I'm going to, when we're done here, I'm Googling that and I'm going to go find it. Because that's something we're dealing with in all of our communities, but here in Shoto, we're putting a community task force together and identifying addiction to substance and things like that. And how do we begin to bring an awareness and limit, or you're not ever going to be able to eliminate it, I don't think, but how do we change the culture around it? And looking at it of, well, we have these drug and alcohol addictions and things that are in our community. We're looking at it the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at, hey, we have this issue, but we're not looking at the why we have this issue, right? And so a study like that says, here are these things, right? Here is what leads us to these areas. If we can eliminate or limit some of these, maybe we can begin to actually help in the addiction part of it, right? Or in the mental illness part of it.
Yeah, and all three of us are serving in poorer states, right? Like this is a reality where we serve. So this is what I love. This is the gospel message that comes out of this whole study. One positive adult relationship in a child's life before the age of 18 can shift those ACEs so that the kid is more resilient. Like you can change the story. Right. And this is proven by data now. And I'm sitting reading this going, are you kidding? Like, oh my God, like this is what we're called to do. This is clearly where we're called to be.
Right.
Yeah. So do check that out. The state has done a lot of studies. So you want to check it out for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Your stuff, Zach, because it's pretty incredible. Billings has done a lot. And actually down in Oklahoma, I would bet you this is starting to spread there too.
Yeah, well, and I'd be intrigued. I'd like to sit down. So we have the tobacco settlement money that we've been working on creating healthier communities. And so I've been a part of, I'm now in my second county. And so the second county, like when they found out that I have experience with the previous county, their TSET, and they're like, we really want you to be involved in this. Like, great, because I really want to be involved in this because I believe in creating healthy communities. And I think that the church can provide, and I'll use some good old Methodist language, the most significant arena for healthy community. But man, if we could, and I was just thinking, man, if we could just tap into maybe one or two ACEs that maybe aren't being tapped into our community, like, man, I just only imagine what we could do. And I think that could be said in every community. It doesn't matter whether if you have 200 people in your community or 15,000 or I think that that's something to really get serious about. And that to me, and that's where, for me, the social principles have become key, especially since talking with Neil. Like, I've really been thinking about this, is that these things call us to action. And so what kind of action do we want to take out of that? With maybe that being the basis, but then just saying, hey, here's where we need to go and here's what we need to do. And realize that the gospel truth is in that, and that's where we're called out into. And so,
and Matt, when I started this ACEs stuff, I was quoting social principles and everything I was writing in my congregation too, right? Like, it was beautiful. Like, the language is good. It's just buried in the discipline. So get out of there and let folks know, hey, it's right here. Yeah. And then I got the sticklers in my congregation that need the discipline to feel like they should do something. So you might as well pull it out anyway. So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so, Tyler, we thank you for your time. I know feel free to come back on anytime and shoot the breeze with us. We would glad to have you back on anytime. Continue doing what you're doing. And want to encourage our listeners to go on our website, and Tyler, we'll try to find some of those links, or if Tyler wants to send us those links, we'll try to have some of those links maybe to some of those studies, and maybe even some of the stuff that Tyler's done, so you can kind of get a good example for that. And that will all be on our website when we post this, probably later this evening or later today or whenever it actually fires up on the internet, in my slow, high-speed internet here in Oklahoma. But we want to encourage our listeners to go on Google Play and Apple and give us 5 stars, and then just bash the tar out of us. We don't really care. We want the 5 stars, so you can say whatever you want. And then, on YouTube, the same thing. Give us many thumbs up and say that you like us, so that then you can just bash us however you want. That just gets us more views. And then go on our website, click on the buy stuff, and buy a few things. We've got some great mugs and T-shirts and all that great stuff that you can do. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and we hope that you share our content online through Facebook and social media, and we hope that you check out our Beardcast store at beardedtheologians.com and pick up some great Bearded Theologians gear. We hope you have a good day.